Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
The mothers called me a baby whisperer because it seemed like when I just knew how to hold that baby and rock that baby and sing to the babies, both of them, that they would just kind of settle down. And I think, so much of it too is the energy you bring. If you bring that calming, regulated energy, then that baby is going to pick up on that energy. If you're all stiff and you're shaking the baby and your voice sounds shaky, then that baby's going to pick up on that too. So really, the way you interact with that baby absolutely supports their emotional regulation.
Hey there, it's Brooke, and welcome to Finding Hope on the Spectrum, where I have heart-to-heart conversations with parents, professionals, and autistic individuals sharing personal insight and life experiences. Together, we dive deep into supports, programs, and stories that offer inspiration, insight, and most importantly, hope for the neurodiverse community. Before we begin with today's topic, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you know someone who this would be helpful for, please pass it along. Remember to always stay curious, be kind, and have an open heart. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm really excited to share that I have Gail Ludwig back on. She was on a little while back where we talked about engagement, and Gail and I have talked about creating a 3-part series. So this will be part 1 of the 3. And we're really excited to share this information. It's so important in the work that we do as RDI consultants, and really feel like it's the foundation for the program and for the developmental process. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about experience sharing today and what that looks like in typical development and what that looks like in our work as RDI consultants and why we work on it and why it's so important. And our next one's going to be on social referencing, and we'll touch a little bit on that here as we go, I'm sure. And that's a big topic that a lot of people would like to know more about. Everybody wants to know about eye contact and gaze shifting, and so we'll delve deeper into all of those things and how we work on that in our RDI programs, our next series. And the third one is going to be talking about coordinating actions. And all of these 3 topics build on themselves, and so one comes before the other, and it's just a beautiful thing to see them unfold in our clients. So we're excited to share, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce Gail, and then we're going to get our topic started. So Gail Ludwig is an RDI program certified consultant and a licensed speech language pathologist. Graduating with a master's in speech pathology in 1982, she has been a practicing speech language pathologist for over 40 years. She received her RDI certification in 2008. Presently, she primarily works as the executive director of RDI services for TAG in San Diego, California. Because of her extensive experience and training, she is able to look at clients in a comprehensive way, which considers their communication, strengths and challenges, relationship obstacles, and sensory motor functioning. Lastly, she has several years of experience supporting students in their school settings, acting as a consultant to school staff, and supervising school shadows using an RDI approach. Gail is very passionate about her work and has experience with clients of all ages. Her philosophy is based on establishing a trusting relationship with her families and supporting them in a way that considers their unique needs. She is a very caring person and works hard at supporting her clients to achieve their maximum potential and have a high quality of life. So welcome, Gail.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Brooke. I'm so excited to be here today and to talk on this topic of experience sharing. As we know, it is the foundation for all human connection and relationships. All of us as human beings, have the right to feel emotionally connected to others and feel valued by others. And we want all of our parents to be able to experience that with their own children.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's so true. It is a human right and it is so important and it brings so much fulfillment and joy to be able to connect on an emotional level with others. And it is just incredibly important. And so I think, we can't emphasize that enough in our programs and in our philosophy on how important this is. So much more important than even learning a set of skills. This really sets the stage for future development and growth. So, we're going to start with talking about what this looks like in typical development and how this plays out in that first year of life, because these are all of the pieces that we want to emphasize and create opportunities to experience with our clients and support our parents in being able to have these moments together with their children. And of course, every program is going to be highly individualized in how we do so. And, it's going to be customized for each family and each child, but we're going to definitely share some topics, some tips, and some ideas on how to work on these things. So let's get started with, the first 2 months of life. Gail, I'm going to have you share just a little bit more about what we see in that first 2 months of life.
Well, the very first thing is that the baby starts to focus on the caregiver's face. And when a caregiver, whether it be a parent or a grandparent or a friend, approaches that baby, and I'm sure you all have had experiences where you see a new baby for the first time and you go up to that baby and you're saying, "Oh, you're so cute. Oh, you're such a beautiful baby." And that baby at that moment might look at you for a moment and then look away. Because at that point, when the baby is a newborn, they have like fleeting eye contact or fleeting ability to make that visual connection with you. But as that baby gets to know their mom or their primary caregiver, that voice becomes familiar to them. And so it becomes a calming or soothing influence on them as they learn to be familiar with not only their mother's voice, but also their mother's touch. The rocking that their mother does to the baby. I know that with my couple of my grandchildren, the moms after bath would give the baby a baby massage. And over time, that baby starts to prefer a human voice and specifically their primary caregiver's voice over any other noises.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I want to talk about that for a moment. That is something that we would call the emotional regulation process. And so we would see that baby becoming more emotionally regulated through the support of their caregiver and that comfort, that rocking, the voice, the intonation that the mother is providing or the father is providing. And I know you mentioned your grandchildren, and I'd love to have you share, some of your real life experiences as we talk about this. And I think that's so important. It kind of brings it to life.
Absolutely. And, it just, as you were talking, I remembered that with one of my first little granddaughters, she was kind of colicky. And what soothed her was not only me holding her and walking with her, but singing to her. Mm-hmm. Often, those children's songs, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Old MacDonald Had a Farm, those familiar songs can be very soothing to a baby, especially coming from a familiar voice. But this is interesting, I did have an experience not too long ago. This was my friend's twin granddaughters who are 6 months old, and the mother called me a baby whisperer. Because it seemed like when I just knew how to hold that baby and rock that baby and sing to the babies, both of them, that they would just kind of settle down. And I think, so much of it too is the energy you bring. If you bring that calming, regulated energy, then that baby is going to pick up on that energy. If you're all stiff and you're shaking the baby and your voice sounds shaky, then that baby's going to pick on that too, So really the way you interact with that baby absolutely supports their emotional regulation.
That's so well said. And I think that's such an important point to really take a minute to pause and think on, because we see that with our autistic individuals as well, the clients that we serve, and talk about that quite a bit, that when you are introducing in a moment growth, that it's so important that you're aware of your own regulation and your own state and your own energy, because that can transfer over very easily to our clients. And we know our clients are so sensitive to, their environment, the sensory input they're receiving. And so, even more reason to be aware of your own emotional state and regulation state.
Let's talk a moment about comfort and safety and how that baby can be comforted and feel safe when there is that beginning of that connection. Again, the connection with the caregiver, the connection with another familiar voice, like, maybe a grandfather or a grandmother, or certainly, I guess we haven't talked enough about fathers either, which is, of course, is a critical relationship for a new baby.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And I think that, all of that is going to lead to that next step in development. And let's just move on to the next stage of the 2 to 3 months and looking at social smiles and, what does that look like in the next phase of development in that first year?
The first smile. Oh, parents just wait for that first smile, don't they? And when they get it, they are so excited. They're texting all their friends and their family members and saying, "Oh, my baby smiled at me." Sometimes it might just be like passing gas, but it's a smile.
Right. They'll take it.
Right, we'll take it. But we're really talking about the smile that is in response to something that the caregiver is doing. And so this could be, tickle, 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 or, just some kind of, cute little noises that the caregiver makes, and then the child responds. And that's what it's all about. That is the very beginning of the social connection. When you do something and the baby responds. And, that is so connected to what we do in RDI, because we want to give children to respond in any way they want to respond. And, there's research that shows, and you can look this up on YouTube, where a baby is with you and responding to your communication, your facial expressions, and all of a sudden you see the baby look away. Because at that moment when that baby is disengaging, they're telling you they've had enough. And they need a break.
Right. And
so
we can
all
see
of
that
this
too.
starts happening at 2 to 3 months.
Yes. And you mentioned that back and forth flow. And I think that is that beginning stage of that feedback loop, of being able to provide information, receive feedback, and your partner provides feedback and you respond to it, and it just flows. And then also, good point, that the baby can look away when the baby's overwhelmed with the environment or that moment or the stimulation. And we see that too in, our clients, and, we specifically work on that. So we're going to talk about that as we get through these stages and how we work on these areas. And as you're listening, I think it's so important to, really think about these things and think about, how important they are, and that these are, focal points in working on, what we work on in RDI. So let's talk about the 4 to 5 month range, that shared joy, and we start to see that early turn taking happening.
Yeah, well, at this time, at 4 to 5 months, your baby is starting to laugh and squeal. And we kind of skipped over the gurgling and cooing stages that happen at 2 to 3 months. So it's gurgling and cooing at 2 to 3, a little bit more sustained eye contact at 2 to 3 months. And then 4 to 5 is when the laughing and squealing, they initiate at that point to get your attention. Even as early as 4 to 5 months, which is really amazing. And that can be, for some kids, the beginning of peekaboo. But when a child responds to peekaboo at the early stages, the parent takes most of the responsibility. They're taking the responsibility to cover their eyes and uncover it, or, put a towel over their head and uncover it, and then the baby laughs or coos. Whereas later, you'll see the child take more responsibility for initiating that game. They also, in terms of emotional regulation at 4 to 5 months, they start self-soothing. They might suck their thumb. They might look away from their caregiver a little bit, but they still kind of heavily rely on the caregiver. And the connection is really starting to get stronger now. There's starting to be a trusting relationship through those predictable, joyful interactions between the mother and the baby, or the father and the baby, or whatever, whoever the primary caregiver is.
Yes. It starts to get really fun at this point, having those back and forth interactions and thinking back on, as you've been with your grandchildren, and I can imagine you can think of these little memories of peekaboo and these types of games, these anticipation games. And, I'd love to just pause and share how that feels. Like, how does that feel in that moment, connecting on that level with your grandchildren?
Oh, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I have had the privilege to be here in Dallas all summer with 5 of my grandchildren, and they range from 8 all the way down to 1. And it's just incredible the moments that I've had with each one of them. I mean, multiple moments with every single one of these grandchildren. And the one, she was 1, she just turned 2. She now initiates the peekaboo game. So she'll hide behind something, and then she'll peek her head out, like behind a piece of furniture, and then she'll peek her head out. And then I'll hide underneath the table, and then I'll peek my head out. And I just make sure to add those variations. So I'm not going to come out every time, at the same moment. I'm going to pause and have it be like a moment of surprise when I come out. Oh, and here's one that I just thought of in the car the other day. So I'm sitting next to my 2-year-old granddaughter in the car, and she's in her car seat. She's just holding my hand. She's holding onto my hand, and I just open it. And she giggled and laughed like you wouldn't believe, just from not knowing exactly when I was going to open my hand. And I didn't even say anything. She was just looking at my hand, like waiting for it to open. And every time I opened it, she would just laugh and giggle. And it was just really something. And you're asking me how it feels. It's just pure joy, pure joy to have those moments of connection. We went to the beach together this summer, and 3 of my grandchildren just being right there at the waves, and I would hold them up over the waves, and we would jump over the waves together, and there's just nothing like it. Yeah. And that's why in RDI, you and I and so many RDI consultants are so passionate about giving families the opportunity to have these moments with their children. Absolutely. Everybody deserves to have these moments of joyful connection.
And I think that's one of the biggest things that families come to us wanting. They want to connect with their child. They want to feel that joy, and not that they don't have it at all, but they want more of it. They want to understand how to create these moments to have that just genuine connection. And we want that for them too. And we know it's possible. And so, it's just so important to have in life. I think, as we know through research, and we've talked about this study before, that, it's shown that the number one factor of happiness is the human connection, to feel like you have meaningful relationships, and that you're of value to others, and they're of value to you, and that you're important and you're connected. And, that is, for us, number one priority. I would say that these individuals and their families have these opportunities. So, I'm glad that you shared those personal stories, because, that just brings it to life, and it's a good example of what we're striving for. So let's talk about 6 to 7 months. Now we start to see some recognition and some shared affect. So let's talk about what that looks like.
I think one of the most important things here is that the child starts to prefer looking at and connecting to the parent or the whoever the human is actually that they're connecting with, rather than just focused on objects, that they seek out that human connection. And they recognize people that are familiar to them, like you said, and they show a preference to certain people. This is the stage where a lot of times if guests come over the house, the baby cries, doesn't want to be, held by the guest because they want to be held by their parent, or they show preference to their parent being with them. I know that, my experience has been that a lot when I had younger grandchildren and they didn't know me as well because I live in a different state, and I would start playing with them and they'd say, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, I want mommy," or they start to cry when they saw my husband, because sometimes, big men are scary because, they're unfamiliar.
Right.
And the voice is unfamiliar. So that connection to familiar people becomes more prevalent. And they actually do things that they initiate actions to keep the caregivers engaged. So I know that a simple example is my husband went over to my daughters, and my little 2-year-old granddaughter kept bringing toys over to him to show him toys because she wanted to interact with him.
Right.
And I think you can all think of experiences like that when you've seen a child bring things over just to share, just for the purpose of experience sharing.
Absolutely. And I think even at this age, the 6 to 7 months, where we'd see that initiation, in, the facial expressions and some body movements, to indicate that they're wanting to connect and, to have that shared back and forth exchange. And, I love that it also kind of brings out that emotional referencing. We start to see that. And that is so incredibly important, as we know, being able to rely on your guide or your caregiver to access support when needed. And that's such a critical area, another area that we work on, we can talk about too, and how we work on that. But, that's just the beginning of having that awareness and the ability to seek out that information at such a young age for that emotional comfort. So, all right, let's go to 8 to 9 months. We start to see that intentional interaction in this stage. So let's talk about the types of thing we see at this stage.
Well, this is where they initiate play. So I was just describing initiating just sharing, and now they'll initiate play. Now they might come alongside you. They may not be walking yet at 8 or 9 months, but they'll come alongside you and want to play with you. And they might hand you a toy and, expect you to do something with it. Now it's not just, okay, I'm showing you this object, but I want you to do something with this object. I want you to play with me. Whether it's a musical instruments are popular at that stage. They might hand you a bell or something like that, or a drum and a drumstick, and they want you to, they'll sit there and wait until you actually start playing with it so that they can see the action and then respond to it in their own way.
Right. Absolutely.
And this is where I was going to say the turn taking starts. And I was just thinking about, okay, maybe with that drum, the parent would be drumming, and then the child would put out their hand and want to take the drumstick and drum themselves. Yeah. And that's where that back and forth starts. And even ball play can start at that age.
Right. Yes. These simple back and forth interactions. And, we're going to talk about co-regulation and what that looks like in a back and forth interaction. And I think that's kind of setting the stage for that and why that's so important. So I can't wait to get to kind of how this plays out for our clients. And the reason we're going through this in such detail is because it's so important to be aware of how complex this whole first year of life is, and how important it is also to not skip over these areas, to work on them and to provide opportunities for growth so that our clients are able to internalize these concepts and this awareness, and they can bring this to the table within their interactions. So let's end with our 10 to 12 month range, and we start to see some more joint attention and some complex sharing. and, gets even more complex in their communication. So let's talk about that.
Well, this is where they expand on sharing an interest with their caregiver. This is when the child starts to point. They will point to things that they want to share or show. They might point to an animal, like if you go to the zoo and the child will see an animal and point and also make sounds like showing that they want to share that they just saw an elephant or a turtle or a bird or a monkey. And that is the beginning of that joint attention, like you said, because they're sharing attention with their parent on the same object. And this is very, very important for the work that we do, because creating that shared attention is where there's opportunity for interaction and for guidance. The parent guiding the child to make discoveries about their world. The child at this stage also will reference or look at the caregiver's face. There's so many examples of referencing for approval. These are kids that at this stage, they're starting to do things just because they know that they're not supposed to do it. And they're just waiting for their parent to look at them and say, no, you can't do that. And they'll actually do it and look back at the parent and wait for their reaction.
Yes, that fun stage.
One that always comes to mind is like throwing things, knocking things off the table or off of their high chair, or throwing things that they're not supposed to throw in the house and then looking at the parent for their reaction. Yes. Dumping a bowl of cereal on the floor. Yes. Dropping their cup. I remember one of our consultants had a young child and did this very simple co-regulatory interaction where the child kept dropping the cup off of their high chair table, and the parent would put it back on the table and the child would drop it again. And the parent would put it back on the table and the child would drop it again. And it just became a joke. And every time the kid would laugh and look to the parent for their reaction. And it just became a beautiful back and forth connection.
Yes. I love that. It just made me think of an interaction with my daughter, who's now 13, but when she was, somewhere around, I would say probably 10 months, and she was sitting on a bed, and she was so cute. She just gotten out of the bath and she had this little frog blanket towel over her head. And I was making these sounds, ah, da, 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 ah, da, 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 da. And she was, kind of bouncing up and down, smiling, and she could hear her dad coming up the stairs. So she was referencing that sound and then referencing me. And I was saying, who's coming? And then, she would look to the stairs or the doorway, and then she would look to me. And it was just this fluid, back and forth referencing and gaze shifting and processing of, the emotional connection, but also, what was that sound? What was bringing that sound and who was coming? And it was just a really sweet moment. I got a video of it. So it really is pronounced, and seeing how that all plays out in such a fluid way.
I can just imagine that. That must have been so cute. And she's just, really looking and waiting, anticipating. That's the beginning of anticipating. Anticipating actions, anticipating what's going to come next, what the person is going to do next. That's so fun. So fun. It makes me think of playing peekaboo like in a bed. And saying, where's Daddy? Where's Daddy? And Daddy's underneath the blankets in the bed. I can't see him. I don't know where he is. And then all of a sudden, Daddy pops out of the bed. There he is. There he is. Yes. And the whole family just cracks up and, again, has that moment of emotional connection.
Yes. And it's just so motivating. It's so powerful to have those moments together. And so all the more reason why it's so important to create them and to support our clients. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time to talk about strategies and, how we work on these things. And now that we've set the stage for what it looks like. And I remember I wanted to mention that book we were asked to read when we first did our training. It was called The First Relationship. And that book is such a great book. I can't remember the author. I don't know if you remember the author offhand, but I can put it in the show notes.
Barbara Rogoff's book. I believe it might have been Barbara Rogoff.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com.
I'm not sure. It could be wrong. She had a different one too, but we'll look it up and we'll include it in the show notes. But that book really sets the stage for all of these pieces, not just what you see in typical development with the child, but also between the child and their caregiver. And that really allowed us to kind of take a close look at what that looks like and why it's so important to consider, and then really consider how we can support our clients that are, diagnosed with autism. So let's talk a little bit about what this looks like with autism. We were talking before we got started on kind of what we typically see in our clients. And of course, every client's going to be different and every family is going to be different. But, how this plays out for clients with autism that are starting out in our program and what we are looking at as RDI consultants.
Well, I think what you and I were talking about was that often these children are just trying to keep themselves safe and comfortable, because they are having a hard time understanding our dynamic world. And so they often will do things that are just like a safety zone for them. They might play on an iPad, they might be playing with their blocks or their cars or things that are familiar to them, that they just feel safe and comfortable, focused on those familiar objects. For them, everything is kind of like equal in value. They really have a hard time deciding what to focus on. So instead, they focus on things that are familiar to them that, again, keep them feeling safe and comfortable. The other piece that I see often is that they can get overloaded by sensory input. Mm-hmm. So these kids, a lot of times, when they're overloaded by what they're hearing, what they're seeing, what they're feeling, again, they withdraw because they can't process all that's coming at them at the same time. Mm-hmm. So this makes it very difficult for them to connect with humans, because they're in that place where they don't feel comfortable.
Right. Yeah, and I think that gives a testament to, the polyvagal theory and the, process that we would all go into when we're overloaded with input and our situation to the level that they're experiencing. And we see that fight, flight, or freeze response. And we know that when they're in that space, any individual has a hard time being able to process information, to learn, to grow. It's really all about protection at that point. Right. And so we see that a lot in our clients, that they're oftentimes, their sensory system is so overloaded, they end up in that fight, flight, or freeze stage or state quite a bit. And so that is really key in our work and our focus in supporting the regulation of the child, supporting the parents to be able to understand the signs of that and how to support regulation first and foremost. And so, I want to make sure that we talk about, what that looks like in our work. And, we've kind of talked about why it's so important and, some of the strategies, and also, how we'll get to how working on experience sharing and connection leads to co-regulation. So let's touch on regulation first.
Well, the first thing is we want to encourage parents to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
Just slow down and be in the moment with their child. Try to get out of that mindset of, I need to get my child to respond. Mm-hmm. We just encourage parents to just be together with their child and slow the process down, come regulated themselves, mm-hmm. so that the child can feel good about being in the same space as their parent. Mm-hmm. And then the second piece is removing some of the sensory input. Mm-hmm. Noise from a television. Sometimes you have to remove the sibling, and it just has to be one-on-one with the child and the parent. Making sure that there aren't a lot of toys in the environment that can be distracting to the child, so the child just can connect with the parent. And we mm-hmm. also minimize materials in general and just work on having that connection to each other. It might be just doing row, row, row your boat together. And these children might really benefit from the vestibular input that they get from rowing back and forth with their parent while the parent sings a familiar song. Mm-hmm. It could be that they're experiencing something like touching shaving cream together, mm-hmm. where they're just enjoying one sensory experience while minimizing all the others. Mm-hmm. It could be something like just blowing a few bubbles. Blow one bubble and the parent says, oh, that's a big bubble. Mm-hmm. I bet you can pop it. Mm-hmm. And then the idea is the child would respond and pop the bubble, and then they might celebrate that. But mm-hmm. for each child, it's different. I've given many recommendations that haven't worked. Mm-hmm. And then you have to go back to the drawing board. Sometimes a simple game of peekaboo, sometimes a simple game of hide and go seek mm-hmm. works. Sometimes it doesn't. Right. Sometimes it's not meaningful for the child, and sometimes it is. You have to find what is meaningful for that particular child, and also something that the parent is comfortable doing with the child. Right.
It's meaningful for the parent as well.
Right.
Yes. It makes me think of one of my clients that you've seen lots of videos of, and she was that type of client that would become, we call it kind of the limp noodle. It's really, really hard when the child becomes kind of withdraws in that way. As we talked about that fight, flight, or freeze, she was really resistant and avoidant to invitations for experience sharing when we started. And, she had a really intensive ABA experience, and it wasn't a positive one for her. And so she was really resistant when she was invited to participate with her parent. We started, and it took us a while. It took us it felt like an eternity, even though it was probably a few months, to kind of work through opportunities and activities to see what she felt safe enough participating in without becoming that limp noodle and just becoming, floppy in her body. And her parents ended up putting her up on this little ledge that her mom just intuitively knew that she was not going to fall off of that or become that limp noodle. She was going to stay upright on it. And I'm glad she tried it. I'm glad she didn't ask me first, because I would have told her, no way, don't put her up on that little ledge. It wasn't very high, but she still could have gotten hurt if she fell off of it. And she put her up there, and sure enough, she was upright, and they had this amazing beginning of their relationship where, her mom was able to, give her that moment of, counting to 3 or saying ready, set, go. And she jumped to her and they connected. And then we started to see her going towards opportunities from there. But it took some time, and we had to just be persistent and not give up on it and believe that it was possible. And,
That's a great example of no materials. I was also thinking about swinging at a park when the child is on the swing and the parent is in front of the child and, grabs onto the child's feet and says, I got you. And then lets them go again, got you. And they never know when the parent is going to get them, because that's another piece of it, is that you want to add variations from the very beginning. Because if you become too static, then it's not fun.
Right.
It's not going to create those moments of emotional connection, because it's just going to be, I'm going to let you swing and then I'm going to catch your legs. You do a swing, I'm going to catch your legs. But instead it's, I don't know when I'm going to get you. Am I going to do it this time or am I going to do it next time? When is it going to happen? And that creates, again, that sense of anticipation without materials. I also had a parent send me a video not too long ago where she and her son were cutting cucumbers, but it wasn't until the moment when they stopped cutting and they were each tasting a cucumber that the emotional connection happened, because the materials were put aside and they were enjoying both tasting that cucumber.
Yes.
Or making a smoothie together and then you each taste it at the same time. Maybe before you taste it, you say cheers, and then you taste it. And it's, again, that moment of connection, tasting that special smoothie that you made together.
Yeah.
Because we do a lot of focus on RDI on the we do rather than I do or you do. It's we do it. We're doing this together.
Yes. And that focus takes the pressure off of the child and sets the stage for a shared experience, which is what we're targeting. And when you take that pressure off, then you're less likely to go into that fight, flight, or freeze mode. You're more available, you're more regulated, and you're more connected, and you feel like you're in it together and you're not alone. And you don't have to just be the one producing all the time, that you have a shared experience. And so I always like to set the stage with the visual of standing side by side versus facing each other. And symbolically, but also physically, a lot of the times it can help to be side by side versus facing each other, because that also takes that pressure off. And a lot of the examples you've shared, Gail, are declarative comments. And I just actually released the episode on declarative communication today as we're recording. So that is another great one to listen to. But I think we should talk about declarative communication just for a moment on what that is and, why that's so important as well.
Right. So declarative communication is when you're sharing your experience. You're sharing your feelings, you're sharing your observations, you're sharing your memories, your plans for the future, you're sharing basically what you're thinking, instead of asking a question or giving a directive. And by sharing, even something like, oh, that's such a beautiful bird, you are giving your child the opportunity to see what you see, because you're sharing your observation and they're hearing it. And it takes complete pressure off of them to respond in a specific way. And they can respond or they might not respond, but you're sharing your experience with them.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's all about your intention. And we talked about it a lot in the episode with Linda Murphy. And she talked about invitational communication and, that message of it's an invitation, but it's not a demand, that you're coming with that intention to genuinely connect and to share. And so that you're not using a comment, but then having a demand secretly hiding behind it where they can feel that pressure. That it's so important that you're coming with that genuine desire just to connect. And so it's a model, it's an invitation, it takes the pressure off. And it really goes a long way, that if you can even just start with some of those kinds of comments that really make such a difference. and when inviting your child into these kinds of interactions, or your student if you're a professional. The other thing that I think is so important is you mentioned the anticipation, and creating moments of anticipation are so motivating and exciting and interesting. And so a lot of times we use the things we call as transition cues. So ready, set, go, or 1, 2, 3, or even ABC. And when we're saying it, we draw it out, we change it up so that we create that anticipation of unpredictability in a level that the child can process. When is she going to let go of me on the swing? Or when is she going to catch me when I'm swinging? And it kind of creates a little bit of a structure to support the child in understanding what's to come.
Absolutely. And, when parents shift to declarative communication, there's also a mindset shift of taking pressure off of themselves to get their child to do a certain thing or to communicate. It's such a freeing thing for parents that they can just share with their child, give their child a chance to respond, instead of putting pressure on themselves to be teaching their child to say certain things or do certain things. And it oftentimes is such a relief to parents to just be able to take that pressure off.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to that initial topic we were talking about of just that your energy and where you're coming from. If you can take your pressure off yourself in that moment, your child's going to feel that. And that's going to go a long way in their own state of regulation and your own as well. It's not just about their regulation, it's about your own regulation too, and where you're coming from. And I want to make sure that we touch on co-regulation before we wrap up, because we talked about that in the typical developing side of things. And let's talk about what co-regulation looks like in our work and how we work on that with our clients.
Well, in our work, we actually establish what's called a co-regulatory pattern. So we help the parents kind of frame interactions with their child so that the parents understand what they need to do and what they can invite their child to do, so that there's a true back and forth by each of them having a role, the parent and the child. And it can be very simple. It can just be a game of ball toss. That can be a co-regulatory pattern where the parent tosses the ball to the child and the child catches it and tosses it back to the parent. And that back and forth establishes a pattern that can become familiar to the child and the child can feel comfortable with. It also serves as a way to achieve that shared focus.
Absolutely. And I think that it's so important as we're talking about our clients feeling overwhelmed or uncertain about their environment, that thinking of a meaningful role, and as you mentioned the word, we frame it. So that means we're slowing down, we're thinking about the type of role we can invite our child to participate in, we're thinking about what our role will be in that interaction. We're considering the environment to set them up for success, to be competent, so we can use that declarative communication. We should not need to have a lot of prompting or any direct prompting, because we're going to use that declarative communication and the scaffolding supports to set that child up for success. And then invite them into this role, and highly individualized. And this is where we were talking about earlier, that it can take time to really figure out in the beginning what that should look like for that child and that parent, and working with the family to create the optimal learning environment, so they have that back and forth exchange and that interaction without that direct prompting. So, I think it's just so important to take the time to reflect, to slow down, to consider, what kinds of things would set everybody up for success and be meaningful and authentic as well.
Right. And we don't want to forget that emotional engagement is going to be central to these interactions. And that's, again, why the declarative language is so important. We'll also be getting more into how we use nonverbal experience sharing. We didn't really touch on that today. Facial expressions, changes in vocal tone, gesturing, so that the children value the nonverbal communication, then that also can support the emotional connection. And it's so important. I mean, actually, maybe we didn't label it nonverbal communication, but that's everything that we were talking about at the beginning.
Right.
Because the child is responding nonverbally. We're making sounds and cooing and, you know, not necessarily using verbal language and smiling. And, you know, so using and valuing nonverbal communication is at the very beginning of life, especially for typically developing children.
Right. Yes. And we can definitely go deeper into that when we talk about referencing. That'll be a great opportunity to go into even more detail on that. And that's such a good point. And so, you know, that also is customized if the child needs you to be a little bit more animated to see that emotion, to see that facial expression, then that may be the case. And we may do that. I wanted to make sure to just touch real quickly on, you mentioned sharing about food, and we're talking about a lot of younger children, but this can also be done with adults. And I had a client that made me think of this memory with this client when you were sharing about the cucumber. I had a client that loves chocolate and different kinds of chocolate. And so I was working on connecting and sharing. He's a speller and had his life coaches with us and his mom. And I brought a couple of different kinds of chocolate bars, fancy ones that were interesting, like orange and raspberry and, you know, just interesting ones. They brought a few too. And we just took time to break up them into little pieces and do some taste tests and to be able to share. And he was able to spell to communicate which one he liked and why. And, you know, we were able to model that as well and share what surprised us or share what was interesting to us. And it was just a wonderful shared experience. And so this really can be done, you know, at any age, at any level, any ability level. And, you know, I think it's just so important and really that foundation for the future development. And so it is critical that, you know, this be in place, it be established, it be internalized. And the beauty is that it can be done and that our clients, you know, just really get, especially the parents, really get to have that experience with their child, that shared memories like you were sharing with your grandchildren, that they get to share with us all these moments they've had together, and what a gift that is for us to receive.
Absolutely. You know, there's nothing like giving families the opportunity to experience this type of joy. And so, you know, just wrapping it up, going back to that human connection, and that it is the foundation of everything. It's such an important quality of life marker to be able to make those connections with people and develop relationships and emotionally connect and feel that joy.
Yeah. I love it. It's beautiful. Well, I'm going to end on that. Thank you so much, Gail, for being here. I can't wait for our next conversation on referencing, and stay tuned.
Can't wait either. Thanks so much, Brooke. Take care.
Thank you. And if you want to learn more about working with Gail and the RDI team at TAG, feel free to go to www.tag4, that's F-O-R, growth, growth.com, and sign up to attend a complimentary RDI presentation. In this presentation, you will learn more about the RDI program, including what is focused on and goals of the program. You will also have the chance to review actual client videos of parents and their children implementing various assignments. This presentation is live, allowing you to ask specific questions along the way. And you can also see sample client videos on the website. Again, that's www.tag4growth.com.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back there. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll leave echoes in every place I find. I'll break the molds with rebels mind. I'm a hurricane of free-born mind.
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.